And welcome everybody to our weekly virtual roundtable. It is so good to see so many friendly faces. It really is different to have this moment now after our time in San Antonio together. Man, I had a great time. Not only did I have a great time in the sessions, I think the highlight, as somebody posted, is when we go to dinner afterward. That Mexican restaurant, anybody remember? I forgot what it was called. That place was insane and fun, and those waitresses were so helpful, and it was a little bit wild, and I was a little bit embarrassed by multiple of you, AJ specifically. Um, the entire event was great, and I'm really thankful to have been there. I'm really grateful that I had a chance to get to know some of you guys in a much deeper way, and I'm really happy that we had the opportunity. So thank you for being there. It reminded me, and I forget who said this, maybe it's Thomas or somebody on social media. It reminded me about the true essence and joy of what this network brings. And that is, yes, fresh ideas, but friendships and the relationships that it has established in my life. And I know many of you guys as well. So thank you so much for being a part of that. Had a great time with each and every one of you, and looking forward to the next events that are coming up very soon. I know we'll see some of you in Tampa, some of you in Chicago. I'm looking forward to seeing each and every one of you. Well, but without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jason. And Jason, why don't you take it from here?
Hey guys, good to see everybody. Like Josh said, we had a blast in San Antonio. For those of you that were not able to make it, we would love to get together with you at some point. So we had a blast there. What were those piñatas like on the ceiling in that Mexican restaurant? It was kind of weird and kind of interesting, but it was fun. Yeah, my thing was getting to know everybody in a deeper way as well. So we're thankful for those of you who were able to take time out of your schedule to join us in San Antonio. Two things I've got. Josh had alluded to it a minute ago, but Idea Day Tampa is coming up next in March. And then 1 week after that is Idea Day in Chicago. And so if you are anywhere remotely close to those areas, or you want to do some travel and come see us, we would love to have you sign up for those Idea Days. You can have more information about that on the website. And then before I kick it over to Jeremy Rands to open us up in prayer here in a moment, I have an announcement at the very end of the meeting today that is a members only announcement. So you must stick around to hear what that is. It affects all of you, and I'm very excited about it. So I'm going to kick it over to Jeremy before we introduce our speaker today.
All right. Hey, AJ, it's good to see you on this call, and enjoyed meeting you and talking with you in San Antonio. I'm going to ask that you unmute yourself, and I want you to pray for this meeting today. Harley Snowd is going to be speaking, so I ask the Lord to use him to encourage us. And also, I know we have a lot of guys right now on the East Coast that went through a lot of storms, and right now in the Midwest, we're going to be hit. And it makes me think of some of these pastors that are starting churches, revitalizing churches, and when they don't meet, it's a big problem. And I know finances aren't our number one priority, but they like to get paid and feed their families. And some of them are just doing a great job. And when they can't meet, it really affects the ministry. So would you pray for the pastors that are being affected by this weather as well? So AJ, you pray for us, would you?
Sure. Father God, thank you for today. Thank you for another opportunity to get together with my brothers and sisters in the Idea Network. Lord, I do want to first lift up our East Coast brothers and sisters that are struggling due to the storm. Lord, I pray you bring them through safely, Lord, to provide for their needs as only you can. Lord, that they would work and they would find opportunity to share the gospel right there through a tragedy and through the storms that are taking place there. Lord, I pray that you would protect them and again, just give them provide for their needs. And Lord, I pray for Harley Snowd today. Lord, I pray that you would actually just give us something that we can use, that we can take, that we can further the gospel of the word, or that we can further expand our coast as churches where we're at and reach people as never before. We love you. Thank you for this time. In your son's name, amen.
All right. Thanks, AJ. Like we've got Harley Snowd with us today, who's going to be chatting with us, giving our talk. So I'm going to turn things directly over to him. And Harley, we're so glad that you're taking some time to be with us today. We're excited for the topic that you're going to share with us. So I'll let you take it from here.
All right, thank you, Jason. Good to see everybody this afternoon. For us in Ohio, for some of you, it's still morning, but good to see you today. We're going to be talking for a few minutes today about preventative care and just some things that are near and dear to my heart as a pastor, as a church planner, as someone involved in counseling and supporting and helping others, both in our church and outside of our church. And so I want to just give you a few thoughts today. I hope will kind of trigger the discussion and the 4 questions that we'll be discussing in a few minutes. Kind of funny, ironic thing happened to me this morning. So earlier today, I was scheduled to speak in a teen chapel. So this was for the Christian school that my wife teaches at, and my boys go to school. I have 2 teenage boys. And I was sitting in the back. We had a couple opening songs of worship, kind of an opening just kind of mixer, getting the teens awake and going. And this was like literally 30 seconds before I walked up to preach or teach. All of a sudden I saw this explosion like right in front of me, like kind of above one of the teenage boys' heads. And I thought that he had a can of pop or something that had exploded. And here he had vomited and he tried to catch it. And it like just shot up and literally almost hit the ceiling above us. So that's just in my head today as I'm thinking about preventative care. And what's interesting is after chapel, a couple of the kids said that he had been in the office earlier that day saying he was feeling sick. So I just kind of the ideas we start, maybe that grosses you out, probably it does a bit, but also kind of leads into our study today that a lot of health and well-being is seeing things before they happen or before they reach the crisis level. So that's kind of the spirit of our discussion today, is thinking about how do we do that, not just on a body level or a bone level, but on a soul level. How do we care for and manage that in our churches, in our ministry, in our home? So that's what we're wanting to try to answer that problem or wrestle with that and the unique ways that we face that in local church ministry, whatever that means for you and your capacity. So kind of the question I would begin with today would be this: why do we see so many, not only just unbelievers, but Christians and even those that lead the body of Christ, why do we see them so on edge, emotionally, mentally, not having clearness of thought, mind, and soul? And I think what I would like to submit today would be this thought that often our care is more a panic mode kind of care. It's once we hit a certain level that then we reach out for counseling, or we go see the doctor, or we bring in some special speaker in our church setting or to our staff, instead of making sure that we're preventatively addressing these needs that are just a part of being a human being. And so I'd like to give you just a few thoughts that hopefully, again, will spark maybe how this applies to you. And I would give you 2 analogies that I think beg us and plead with us to practice preventative care. One would be, a lot of us maintain buildings. I know I've been to Jeremy's church and several others on this call, this Zoom call today, where you have significant property and campus and you have to practice what's called preventative maintenance. And one definition of that would be preventing costly, unplanned downtime from unexpected equipment failure. So by preventing, we're actually able to avoid that. And so that's an interesting analogy as it relates to preventative care. And then the other one that we use a lot in our counseling would be well visits. So we're not going to the doctor just when we are crashing in some way, but we're going on a regular basis. And I just crossed the 40 mark. I'm getting ready to turn 42 here in a few weeks. And I'm starting by my wife, hey, you need to go in for this test and you need to keep up with this. And obviously those are things we all have to adjust to as we go through life. So the idea of wellness visits, that's interesting. Even a lot of insurance companies value that enough that they pay for that completely. There's not even a copay. They see the value even from a fiduciary or financial standpoint to fund what are just well visits. And so we need to be prioritizing that in our ministries, our leadership, not just physically, but otherwise. So I want to give you two areas to think about as it relates to that of preventative care as leaders of the local church. The first would be we need preventative care with those who lead the church. So those of us on this in this conversation today, I think would primarily fit in that category, that we ourselves need to take care of and practice preventative care as leaders of the church. As you guys know, leading the church really takes out of us. There's regular withdrawals emotionally, there's regular withdrawals mentally, relationally, and without regular deposits, that gets depleted and continues to get depleted, and we begin to run on fumes in areas that are detrimental, if not lethal, to our influence. You guys have probably heard this term before, but a lot of counselors will use this expression, the body keeps score. So no matter what you do and what corners you cut and things that you cheat on, your body will not let you ultimately get away with that. And that involves not just us physiologically, psychologically, emotionally. The body always keeps score. And a lot of times we as leaders, we push hard, we try to push through that. A lot of the guys that I'm allowed and the privilege of influencing, that's the thing I hear is I hit a wall. And so we have to be bringing back in as we're giving out. And I think a lot of it is just admitting that we're human, we're finite. I'm a driven guy. I'm a task-oriented guy. I hate vacation in a lot of ways. I hate when everybody's out of school and things aren't in routine. I'm just a routine guy, but I have learned I have to rest. I have to renew. And so I would encourage you to think on where that applies for you. Jeremy and I were having lunch a few months ago, and he was saying to me, I thought a good thought, I think you posted on it later, Jeremy, but something to this effect, that often we leaders, we're disliked by those that we lead, not because we're faithfully following Jesus, unlike they are, but because we're living in a way that hurts people. And so if we're hurting and if we're running on fumes, we're obviously going to be impacting others. And what happens is we play the victim, when in reality, we are not stewarding well the energy and the life that God has entrusted to us. So I would just challenge us as church leaders, we need to practice preventative care. And then maybe this last thought before we move to the second category, have you noticed that your church tends to take on your personality, especially as senior leaders? Your staff takes on your personality, however you view political things, relational things, financial things, whatever. They tend to take their cues from us, either by having the same vibe or reacting to that, but we're setting the tone in those areas. And so I think to me, what gives me hope as a leader is where I see unhealth in my church, a lot of which I cannot control, a lot of which I have very little influence or voice into. I can be the catalyst for movement in that area by simply tending well my own soul and those in my immediate sphere of influence. So I think I would encourage you first in your own life and then in your staff and even lay leadership to really prioritize leaders having this preventative care, giving time off, being very intentional on how you manage that. And I can't remember who said this first, but if you're taking notes, this might be a key takeaway today. Self-care is not selfish, it's strategic. Self-care is not selfish, it's strategic. So it's not that it's about us. And I think one of the things I've noticed in different blog posts online is sometimes we pastors can just play the victim. We church leaders can make it about us and how hard we have it. I would submit to you, the only reason we're pursuing well-being is so that we can love God and love our neighbor and specifically love the body of Christ that he's entrusted to our care. So self-care is not selfish. It is ultimately strategic. And that has been revolutionary to my wife, Heidi, and I, is believing that, practicing that, making no apology for that. I'm not being selfish. I am, and we are being strategic. So that would be the first area of self-care that we really need, preventative care that we need to work at, is just us, first of all, making sure we're taking care of ourselves. Number two, so it'd be those who lead the church. Number two, those who comprise or make up the church. So I do think we want to be concerned about the the health of our church, the health of those that make up our church. I was in Atlanta this past weekend doing a wellness weekend, and the church I was in was telling me about how Atlanta people process snow. We got on this morning and Josh was joking about, the fact he's got 60 plus degrees and he's suffering for the Lord there. And Jeremy and I are talking about how many feet of snow we're going to get this week. So that's obviously all relative, but they if they get any snow, and they did while I was there this weekend, and they just almost were in a full panic mode. I was eating dinner at a cheesecake factory with a couple of cousins of mine that live in the area, and all of a sudden everybody just started moving toward the windows looking outside, and all they were getting was a dusting of snow, but it was like full panic, just worried about what was going to happen. And they were telling me stories of, I don't know if you remember back in 2014, they got 2.6 inches of snow and it like shut the whole city down. I don't know if you remember that, but people stayed in their cars for 24 hours on I-85, and kids stay at the school overnight. And they started telling me why snow affects them that way. And it helped me at least understand why that's such a big deal to them. And I think sometimes with our people, we don't think about where they're at, what they deal with, what they're navigating. And are we as a church, are we as a community, a fellowship of believers, are we providing them what they need to maintain health, whether that's mental, emotional, physical? And I think we need to be willing to take a hard look at that if we're going to shepherd well those that God has put in our care. And so I think that's a struggle for us sometimes, is it's always, our people just aren't responsive, or they're not following what we're encouraging them or inspiring them to do. It could be that we're not providing for them the preventative care that they need. And because of that, there are challenges. I would submit to you just a thought today, maybe a question would be this: what in your church, whether that be division, whether that be hesitancy, things that we tend to feet of our people, that some of that is our responsibility as leaders to provide the resources they need. If someone's unhealthy, they're going to be divisive. If someone's unhealthy, they're going to be resistant. And so, two healthy people get along a lot better, and a whole body that's pursuing that. I don't know if you listen to Craig Groeschel's podcast or not, but he often uses this expression. He says, a great leader never says our people won't. A great leader says, we haven't led our people to. And I think sometimes we're blaming our people for things that, yes, they have a volitional responsibility, but we're not giving them the resources, the tools that they need to be able to steward well what God has given to them. And so I think we have to own that and to do what we can. And we're going to talk about that in our discussion time. How do we get better at that? Giving to them the tools, the access, others that can help them to both prevent and maintain in the areas that they need to. Newhoff made a statement recently that I thought was really good. He said, if you don't choose intentionally the path of self-care, you will likely end up on the path of self-medication. And I think a lot of our people, I'm not saying all medication is wrong, much of it is, God uses that, but our people are often medicating with whatever, whether that's an actual pharmaceutical, whether it's alcohol, whether it's online activity, whatever the sports, whatever, but they're numbing themselves to the unhealth in their life. And instead of us resenting where those things are competing with our role in their life, maybe we should look at where there's unhealth and be a little more proactive in that and look beyond the immediate to what's the root issue of that, and how do I as a leader facilitate that health. That right there, what I just said, has helped me not to have a complex where my church has unhealth, and not to take personally where there is actually an issue that's hindering them from buying in or being fully engaged in whatever God has led us to do as a church. So I would encourage you to think about that. Unhealth never ages well. So we can't afford to ignore it as the body of Christ until there are irreversible consequences of that. We need to deal with it as soon as possible. To me, the best time to deal with unhealth is yesterday, and the second best time is today. Like, just own that and initiate. Don't wait and hope it's going to get better on its own. No doctor would do that. No practitioner would do that. No counselor would do that. we as church leaders can't ignore those signs of unhealth. We need to lean into those as quickly and thoroughly as possible. And then kind of a last thought would be this. I think sometimes we think we're doing the right thing in care of our flock, but we're not thinking about the when. So obviously the who and the what matter as we practice preventative care, but also the when. And healthy leaders always live with vision. Healthy leaders are always looking around the bend or around the corner. And so as we look at our people, we need to be able to have the foresight to prioritize the care that will protect them and protect our church from things that would come down the road. If you guys are like me, I don't thrive on confrontation. Some guys do, maybe in this forum. I don't. And my tendency is to drag my feet when the only reason is because of me, my comfort, my preference. And because I wait, a lot of times that leads to exacerbated problems, more extensive damage, scar tissue that develops because I didn't take the lead in that area as soon as I should. And that could apply in our families as well, but we're talking in the context of the church. All right, last quote, and then just a verse or a biblical principle, and then we'll open it up for discussion today. Have you ever heard the expression before, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure? Have you heard that expression? That expression originated with a guy named Benjamin Franklin. That he's an interesting guy. A lot of people think highly of him. He also was I've read a few biographies about him. He was a quirky guy, an immoral man in some ways as well, but one of the fathers of our country. And he made the statement, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And where that quote comes from was when he was talking about the Philadelphian fires. They were having fires left and right in the city of Philadelphia early on in our country's history. And he was trying to encourage the city council and those in charge of all of that municipality, instead of us just trying to put out fires, let's think about what we can do to prevent fires. Smokey Bear, I guess, would be the modern version of that in our day. Only you can prevent forest fires. But the tendency in our ministry, both in our own souls, as well as the souls of those that we minister to, we're putting out fires, and that's taking a pound out of us and out of our ministry, when just an ounce of prevention would be a much better stewardship of our resources, our time, our focus, our influence. And so I think there's a mantra for us to develop. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so we need to not be at the bottom of the cliff trying to help people after they've fallen. We ought to be on top of that, cautioning them, warning them, counseling them to prevent that fall that would occur. In Revelation chapter 3, with this idea of the Philadelphians, John is writing, Jesus is communicating with the church there in Philadelphia. And it's interesting, he doesn't rebuke the church of Philadelphia for anything, right? The other churches have commendations, they also have rebukes, but the church of Philadelphia, of brotherly love, there is no confrontation in that letter. And it's interesting because in that letter, Christ commends the church because they have endured. And I just wanted to read a phrase from that. He says, "For thou hast little strength, hast kept my word, has not denied my name. Because thou hast kept my word, or the word of my patience, I will also keep thee from the hour of temptation." I think much of the fall that we have, much of the stumbling that we have, is not because of the weakness in the moment, but the lack of preventative care beforehand. And so I just want to encourage us today to think on where this applies, how this applies, both as leaders. Where am I waiting till I'm literally moments from failure or devastating, irreversible decisions? And number two, where am I living in a reactionary mode with my flock, with my group that I lead, my staff that I lead? And where can I get out ahead of that with this idea of preventative care? So I trust that kind of sparks some thoughts in whatever direction God leads that. But I think our churches will be stronger. And just as the church at Philadelphia was a faithful witness of Jesus Christ, we too can be as individual leaders and as local bodies if we'll practice preventative care.
All right. Thanks, Harley. I appreciate you sharing that with us today. I just threw the discussion questions that Harley has for us into the chat. If you guys want to copy and paste those, let me read through them real quick, and then we'll divide up into our breakout rooms. Question 1, what hurdles do we need to overcome to truly buy into the statement that self-care is not selfish, it is strategic? 2, what forms of acceptable self-medication do you see us naturally gravitating toward at the expense of intentional soul care? 3, how can we as church leaders prioritize preventative care in our own bodies and souls on a more regular basis? And then 4, how can we provide to our church family or to our family and church a more regular emphasis upon access to resources that promote physical, emotional, and mental wellness? A lot of great questions and great content, Harley. Thanks again for sharing that with us today. And at this time, we're going to be sent into our breakout rooms.
Hey guys, how you guys doing today? Why don't you guys go ahead? You could all unmute, and that way we can probably free flow a little bit here. Man, I was thinking about the puking kid, and so I want to do a little icebreaker here. What's the most unusual thing or funny thing that's happened to you while preaching? I'll go ahead and start. I've had 3 people have heart attacks in auditoriums while I've been preaching in my ministry. 2 in 1 month, and 1 as a guest preacher in another church. Literally, the paramedics came in the middle of the sermon. He was back under the balcony, and they got him and took him out, and without ever breaking stride on the message. And then another time it was 2 within a month. So anybody ever have any really crazy stuff going on while you're preaching like that?
Have you come preach here again?
Tommy,
That's too hard of preaching.
No, it was crazy. I mean,
Killing people.
yeah. All right, Bob.
Yeah, one service on an evening service. The side door on the platform opened up, and this guy with mud from his knees down walked out on the platform, and I tried to get him to get a seat, and some of the ushers came and we got him in a seat, and they finally took him out in the foyer. And then almost at the end of the service, I had 2 police officers in the foyer, and so I went to talk to him, and he got in a fight at the corner bar just a block from the church. He was running from the cops, ran through the backyard of our neighbors and was checking doors, and the ushers didn't lock our door on the back door. And so he got in the building and he just found his way out on the platform.
That would be crazy, man. A little intimidating.
Yeah,
man.
I'm like, hey, I'm glad you're here. Come have a seat.
Since I've been here in Chicago, I had to call the cops on a lady acting crazy, running through the church during the Sunday school hour, but it carried over till after the main service started. Then when I was at Grace preaching on a Wednesday night, actually during our Bible study, a guy got mad at my preaching and stood up and started coming at me to the pulpit. And I had to kind of, I was prepared to do the bionic elbow from the platform on him, but he stopped.
Tell you what, man, it's good to have people packing in the auditorium, around you. Never know who's coming in crazy and what they're coming for, man. So, well, guys, self-care, I think it's an important subject, but if we were all honest, we would say it's an uncomfortable subject, because my experience has been in ministry as pastors are some of the worst people I know about taking care of themselves. I don't think it has to be that way. It's kind of like the old adage, the painter's house never gets painted. The mechanic's car is always falling apart. My oldest daughter's a CPA, and yet she can be the worst about keeping up with that sometimes, So this first thing, what hurdles do we need to overcome to truly buy into the statement that self-care is not selfish, it's strategic? Why do we think it's selfish? Yeah, David, definitely.
Yeah, the reason I want to start off is because I'm busy working and I happen to have a gap. Okay. For me, the biggest thing that I had to get to ahead of time, self-care is not selfish lack of self-care is selfish. It's pride to assume that we're just going to keep going and keep making it, keep pushing through. Just like he was saying, the body always takes the toll. It knows what happens. And once I got past that point, because, I, like a lot of us, is raised in one of these, Judeo-Christian work ethics. I work harder, we get through it all, and then I'll push on, I'll sleep when I'm dead. And we all have those times. But when I realized, like, that's my pride, assuming that I'm going to make it through. I'm presuming upon God that he's going to give me the energy and not let natural consequences happen. And once I realized that was pride, that release was the huge, huge first step that I needed to take in switching to a mindset that said, I need to take some time for myself.
Yeah, pride's a huge one. I was ordained this September will be 30 years. So I've been ordained for 30 years. So I've seen a lot of shifts in ministry. And I know in my early training for ministry and in that culture, it really stimulated a lot of that pride. You don't quit, you burn out, things like that. And I think we were never really taught that it was important to take care of yourself. It was almost seen as a weakness. I don't see so much now in younger guys coming up, which I think is a great thing. But pride, man, definitely that pride of, being strong enough and, succeeding. What are some other things you see, obstacles to really good self-care, to where it's selfish versus strategic?
Yeah, I got you, Mike. I dealt with, some different situations in my early ministry, but I never thought to slow down or to take time. It wasn't really until my kids started getting older, and then they started dealing with some tragedy within their life, and then I wore that emotional stress for the first time, and that's when I realized I needed to take care of my own self and to take care of my wife during some of that. But being young and going into an established church, either to revitalize or to replant, and that's what I've done twice now, is replant churches. There's a certain expectation of accountability, that you're accountable to the people that are already there, that you're there to shepherd. And if you are not in the office, or if you're not doing the things that they think you ought to be because you're young, they then want to try to help you and tell you what you ought to be doing, maybe in a loving way and maybe in a condescending way. But that's the biggest hurdle as a young pastor, is having to deal with either maybe unspoken expectations, but certainly spoken expectations.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, that's something you have to get a handle on very early on. And when he was talking, one of the words I wrote down was, maybe it's an overused word sometimes, boundaries. You have to determine what your access is. And some people have the mentality, I'm the pastor, I'm available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Sounds good on paper. It's not going to last very long. So what are your boundaries? That people, their expectation and understanding of what they should or shouldn't bring to you. And that we're talking right now more about our own self-care more than their self-care. So kind of establishing that. So anyone else, something there as far as, obstacles to preventing us from overcoming the idea that self-care is weakness or selfish rather than strategic?
Mike, I would say, and this is based on my personal experience, I would use the word ignorance. And when I say that, what I mean is, I did so much ministry for so many years, up until about 8 years ago. I would say I've been in ministry 25 years. So almost, 18, 19 years of ministry, I was what I would call ignorant, meaning that, like some of the guys have said, the way you were taught to do ministry, the expectations, the pressure from your peers and all that. And self-care, soul care wasn't even talked about, amongst us. It was taboo. It was a weakness. And but back when I was working on my MDiv, I had several classes that dealt with spiritual formation, spiritual maturity, And I had to read a lot of books. And one of the books I read that I talk about all the time by Aubrey Malphurs on being leaders, it was a book that really forced me to take a look at myself, to do some self-assessment and recognize both my strengths and my weaknesses. And I'm telling you, after I read that book and did some additional reading, it was just a game changer for me to realize how much my self-awareness, recognizing who I am, my identity, and then resting in what my strengths and weaknesses were, and understanding that some of those spiritual abilities gifted abilities are just natural and some can be honed, but then understanding my weaknesses, not trying to pridefully overcome them, but just recognize I need other people around me that can do things that I can't. You know, the old mindset is you have to be the hero at every level. You have to operate at 100% at every level, rather than recognizing the strength of bringing other people who are good or better at certain things around you, building a team around you, in other words, to help you plan for success.
Yeah, and I was thinking that earlier, and I realized a lot of times in here, you know, I have a benefit of longevity. A lot of times, a lot of guys are newer, but for me, it's the team. It's once you have that team in place, you're trusting people. I think it's the book by Larry Osborne, Sticky Teams, and he talks about seasons of teams. And you start out, you're like a triathlete, right? You got to do it all. You're a church planner. And then he talked about you become golfing buddies, and then there's a basketball team. We're kind of at the, you know, high school football team now. We got specials, you know, we got defense, we got offense, we got special teams, and head coach. But I've just had to learn to accept other people's best, even if it's not my best. And that's a hard thing for me. But, you know, I've just realized it's just not always going to be. So I think there's a lot of things like that tie together. But I think, Tommy, it goes a lot what you're saying there with ignorance. And I would say really the cure is it's experience. This is just going to happen more over time. But the more you're aware of it, the younger you are, man, you're just so much further ahead than say I would have been, because culture I was discipled in and came out of was about as unhealthy as you could be. And it was just acceptable, you know, to be unhealthy, prideful. So, hey, this next question, what forms of acceptable self-medication do you see us naturally gravitating toward at the expense of intentional soul care? So what is acceptable self-medication? Like probably going out and most of us in our culture, probably going out and just getting drunk and kind of getting it off. That's probably not acceptable. You know, acceptable self-medic, maybe up in Chicago. I don't know. They're a little rougher up there, but I'm here in Florida. By the way, I'm here in Florida with 75-degree weather today. Just thought I'd share that with you. But what do you think is some acceptable things that can make us kind of be lazy because people let us get away with it?
Hey, Mike, I'd like to jump in on this one.
Yeah.
Hey, so I think we numb ourselves with social media and things like that that'll distract us. Binge watching shows and various things like that. All nothing bad in moderation. However, I know I've found myself in times of stress or something like that of zoning out or tuning out, rather than either doing what Harley was talking about, of either addressing the problem or maybe, you know, doing something more healthy, maybe go for a run or a walk, or, I mean, hey, go to God in prayer. There's a novel thought. I'll scroll through social media, or I'll just kind of numb myself out sitting on the couch or doing something like that to kind of deal with it. And it's become almost acceptable to us, because I know in my head, I'm thinking, oh, I'm interacting with friends and I'm networking, or I'm going to make a post that's encouraging and 11 people are going to come to Christ because of my post. You know, we tell ourselves these lies when really, like, no, we need to step back and actually take care of ourselves and you know, use that stuff in moderation.
Wow, that's a big one there. I mean, I know for me, I can veg out on TV and it's, you know, it's all good. I'm not watching anything bad, right? But man, hours go by. Yeah. Wow, that's convicting. Somebody else, acceptable forms. All right. Let's move on to 3. Let's look at that third question. How can we as church leaders prioritize preventative care of our own bodies and souls on a more regular basis? I noticed in his talk, he didn't give a lot of how-to. He kind of set a framework. And so I was really hoping that maybe we would kind of pull some how-tos in this side conversation.
I think first we have to say, how do we recognize the time frame of when to be preventative? Because obviously, we have to put in the work, we have to put in the study, we have to put in the evangelism and the networking, and if you're a ascending church, you have to stay connected with your missionaries and church planters and your other staff members. So you have to put in the work. So the question that I have is how to schedule the preventative stuff. How do you manage that? And what does that exactly look like in a full scheduled week with children and homework and things like that on top of it?
Wow, that's it right there. Someone have something to add to that? I have some thoughts, but Bob, go ahead.
So for most of my life, I've always been kind of the positive. I love to get up at 5 a.m. I'm ready to go every day, amazing day. I love doing what I do. And so I never really thought about those things. And I had a hard time communicating or empathizing with people that maybe were going through discouragement and depression and that kind of stuff. And so through this last year, I just, in trying to help other people, I just went to a counselor and said, hey, I don't know why I'm here, but I felt like the Holy Spirit wanted me to come see you, and found a Christian counselor based on a recommendation of a pastoral friend, and started seeing him. And I just see him once a month, unless I need to do more, but once a month just to kind of check in and talk. And what I found is I wasn't all as buttoned up as I thought I was, and that there are some issues around that. And I've been greatly benefited from that. And from that standpoint, I've been able to recommend just in the last 6 months, 5 other of our folks to really take that step, and that it's a positive step and not a negative connotation to that, just by saying, look, I go and just been able to help. And we just schedule it certain time, certain day, every month, don't miss.
That's good. Someone have a Philip, were you going to say something?
Yeah, and this kind of goes along with what Bob was saying. I was thinking about this when you were bringing up this question. What gets scheduled gets done, and if we need to schedule regular times, like Bob was saying with the appointments and things like that, regular times of getting away, regular times of relaxing and just resting our minds. For me, I love to read, and so many times in my downtime, I'll try to read. But reading and studying is so much of what we do in our work for the church. So I need times to break away from that and to discipline myself. So I'm thankful that on many Tuesdays, my family gives me this hour, but Tuesday is our family day. We schedule it, and we don't let anything interfere with that. And then along with that, scheduling it, also accountability. I went to my men several months ago, and I said, hey, we need accountability. I need you to hold me accountable, and you give me the openness to hold you accountable. So because we need to be healthy if we're going to lead properly. So accountability.
Yeah.
A book that I recently read, it's along these lines, Dangerous Calling. It was very, very helpful.
Okay. Yeah, and one thing I was going to say, that it's not by any means original, common concept, but been real helpful to me, the idea of rhythm versus balance. For me, there's just inevitably going to be times when I have to be busy. I'm going to have to be sacrificing other things. That's acceptable. You just can't do that all the time. So for me, in my rhythms, there's just seasons where I know I don't have a lot of downtime. I got to come out of that season for a season where I'm able to have a lot of downtime, some recovery. It's been really hard for me to try to schedule a balance into every week because my life just doesn't flow that proportionately all the time. And but rhythm, I learned that from a friend of mine, Greg Peters. Rhythm versus balance has been a real helpful concept to me, something you guys might want to delve into and look at. Hey, let's hit this last question. We have like 3 minutes. How can we provide to our family church a more regular emphasis upon the access to resources that promote physical, emotional, and mental wellness? How can we provide a more regular emphasis upon access to resources? One thing we have done is we budget money to pay for counseling if people need counseling. We will pay for people's counseling for areas with strings attached to it, that there's going to be some accountable relationships in it. We just realized that my giftedness is not high in the counseling realm. There's a point where I'm counting ceiling tiles, I just admit it. I can just zone. But you know what? I don't necessarily have to be the greatest counselor, but I have to be able to provide counseling for people in the church and making sure they have access. So that's something we've done, is created some money in the budget to help facilitate counseling people. Just one thing we've done. You guys got any other thoughts on how we provide a more regular emphasis upon it, or access?
There's been moments, just last year, we had an issue with our youth student pastor. And as a result of that, I just stood up on a Sunday morning and had to kind of share the details of it. And then on the heels of that, we basically announced that we would be offering counseling for free. And so we just, made a public statement and made the process available to anybody that needed it. So we just basically clearly communicated it real time. And we still have people, this is, probably 6 months ago, we still have people in counseling from that. And we told them we would pay so many sessions.
A lot of times I find you can find a local counselor that will create a relationship with your church and maybe even give you a rate because you're going to primarily deal with them. And you don't have to be the greatest counselor, guys. I thought when I became a pastor, I had to be this great counselor, and I was never good at it. And I just thought I had to work harder. I just realized that's not my best use. It's not my best giftedness. So, but you need to get it to someone. Here's something I wanted to throw out there, make sure we got it in. Are you guys open to sharing your struggles with your church? It's one of the best things you can do is, obviously have some wisdom, where you're going, but man, there's nothing better than telling your church you're depressed. If you're depressed and you're going through a season, you don't want to become the woe is me guy where people are more looking at you as the person they need to kind of prop up rather than their leader. But I tell you, it's good to be able to share things with your congregation. What are you guys' thoughts on that? That's my thought.
I've just seen that just being real with people, saying, listen, I'm just a regular guy, but I have a different call in my life to share the gospel. That is what I'm trying to do. But I'm no different than you. I have the same temptations and struggles and all these different things. And I have found that people have, at least so far, reacted with, hey, you know what? I don't feel like you're looking down on me when you say that you have the same struggles that I do. You're just trying to give me a hand up, and trying to help me out. And so I found that that's really helped out, just being a little bit more transparent, telling them, listen, I'm going to let you down. I don't want to, but I will. And when it happens, I want to help, work through it instead of, you thinking that I did it because I don't love you or whatever. I'm just another guy. That has helped me, Mike. I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. I just felt it really helps getting people on the team with you. When you're telling on yourself, man, you're just inviting support, rather than this image of the perfect pastor, with no struggles. That's so discouraging to people, that there's this life of perfection that you have, that they know they don't. You know what I mean? I just think it's so helpful. All right, anyone else want to add to this? I know they're kicking us out in 59 seconds, but somebody, just something that's on your heart, you just want to get it out there. Go ahead,
Mike,
right now.
I just pulled out a bunch of books on self-care and stuff like that. I took a picture of it. I'm going to share it on the Idea community page after this. There's like 15 books here, and the ones on the top are the ones that I rate the most helpful. So anyways, I'll share that on the Idea community page for this.
Okay, on the community page. Okay, great.
It'll be on both the official member page, whatever it is, both of those, I'll put it there.
Perfect. Thanks, Tom, man. That's great. Appreciate that, man. You need a lot of self-care in that cold weather up there. Bob?
Any of the Emotional Healthy series by Peter Scarsaro is good stuff too.
Great podcast there.
Top of my book, top book on the list.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Thanks. Great conversation.